trigger fatigue as an underlying factor of social worker burnout. Now, as I'm beginning this talk, I want to give you a couple of quotes that were given by social workers who worked for the VA and how they described providing care during the pandemic. And as I give you these quotes, I want you to think about it and going, is what we're talking about really burnout in this pandemic and post-pandemic era? And so we'll go from there. So let's start with, every day is about survival, and it is a victory to make it to the next day. That doesn't sound to me like burnout. Since when has burnout been a life or death situation? When has it been about survival? When has it been about a victory to be able to provide care for your clients the next day? This is not burnout. And so, as we look forward with researching whether you want to call it burnout or something else, there's some steps that really need to be taken in order to address this workforce deficit that we're facing in the profession until at least the year 2030. Okay, so let's look at it this way. Why do we in the profession give the term burnout so much power? It's negatively loaded, and anytime anyone hears it, it's the shrieking, it's the end of the profession, that's it. And so many LinkedIn posts that I look at, when they talk about the stages of burnout, it ends at burnout. It ends at lose motivation, and that's the end. But there's such an important period or phase that no one is talking about that has probably just as much importance to retaining social workers and attracting future social workers. And that's burnout recovery. We cannot give that term such power because guess what? People can and do recover from burnout. Let me say that again. People can and do recover from burnout. So if we start with the way that we frame looking at burnout and not giving it so much power, we deconstruct it and not be so afraid of it. If it does happen, it does. And it's not all terrible. Sometimes with burnout, it's what is gained, not just what is lost. Okay, so we've really changed that whole thinking to, okay, we can't imagine, burnout being the worst and that's it in the profession. No, almost everyone in social work, whether it was getting education in a master's program to become social workers, people have burned out in one way or another, and it is not the end. Now, what I want to introduce to you is what I believe is actually going on among many social workers right now, which is this idea of trauma trigger fatigue. Now, trauma trigger fatigue is a nuanced concept that we developed. And so to kind of unpack it a little bit, as I went to an NASW conference this recent summer, more social workers are entering the profession with prior instances of trauma and injustices. That's what's driving them to the profession because they also want to help others to overcome those barriers. But what happens is that when you come to the profession with prior instances of trauma, and in the study that was revealed at NASW, some are coming with 4 or 5 or 6 adverse childhood experiences. That's a lot. But with these traumas comes a lot of invisible wounds. Invisible wounds that have been kind of nurtured and taped up for the most part over these times. And what's happening is that social workers pre-pandemic had the skills, you might want to say, to thwart off those triggers that were affecting the invisible wounds from the trauma. Okay, they might have gone out for coffee, they might have gone out to have drinks with friends, they might have gone to the movies, gone to the gym. But that all changed during the pandemic. And this is where a lot of social workers, not all, but many, who have prior instances of trauma are really overloaded. It is this emotional overload that's causing the fatigue, then leading to the burnout, then leading to the turnover. Okay? So with this trauma trigger is that, whether it had been when they were a child or something, a parent, so forth, they were victimized or they were a victim of, or they witnessed an atrocious act. Now, with that trauma trigger comes also other considerations. Is that, when this completely switched during the pandemic, a lot of social workers had to self-isolate. Why did they isolate? Because they had to, for fear of infection. So when that happened, guess what? Their whole regimen went upside down. And they were stuck having to work in isolations. And social workers depend so much on mutual support from colleagues and leadership, being able to see their clients in person, or to at least see their gestures, their body gestures. That all changed. And guess what the focus then became? That trauma, the invisible wounds from their trauma. And this created a disaster. Because so many social workers then, if they had perpetrators, for instance, were worried that the perpetrators might come to hurt them or their loved ones in their home. And it came to a point where every time that they thought about something, it was the focus of that unresolved trauma. They could not thwart off the triggers. It was these constant trauma triggers, and as we're seeing now continuously, we're seeing people in the media, people in power, celebrities, who, when you hear about their acts that they are committing, is that again, that triggers the trauma to remind them of the lack of social justice that's occurring in society. Now, which brings me to our next point, is that there's the ideal versus the real. Okay? We've been taught, especially in social work programs, and let me just give you this example, this analogy, because I'm all about sports, and I want to tell you how I see this as sports. You're a high school football player. You attend every practice. You do every drill. You know all the plays. You give it 100% effort. The ideal says you do that, you're going to get playing time. The real says it ain't happening. And that's where you have the ideal versus the real that are not meeting up and connecting. As social workers, we're taught to promote social justice. We believe that justice will happen. That's what drove us to want us to be able to have these really lofty goals to end child abuse or to end homelessness. But it's the ideal, and it says you can do everything right, and it doesn't mean it's going to happen. We as a society are frustrated because this is totally deceiving what we were taught when we were younger. And it's really trying to marry the ideal versus the real as a way to really compensate for this, but we are deceived. So many triggers out there. When you turn on the news, when you look at newspapers, again, it's this person did this, but they're getting away with it. Maybe because they have money or so forth. But wait, that's not what we were taught. And then again, it takes us back to our traumas, to where those invisible wounds are opened up and infected, and it keeps hitting us. And we get exhausted from that. And that's where we really see this burnout is occurring. And so, social workers are in much of need, as their clients are right now, because the pandemic was a tough time, and now we're post-pandemic, and things are still permeating. And one of the biggest kickers about all this is that so many social workers have trauma because they're cleaning up the messes from prior generations. It is so frustrating. We did not ask for this, yet we're having to clean up the messes that have permeated and continue on to our generation. And that's another part that is making it so frustrating. Is this idea that, hey, we're dealing with this trauma, we did not ask for it, we did not ask to be put in this situation, but it is really having these long-term effects. Okay, so where do we go from here? Well, guess what? There are ways to think about this. Burnout is multifaceted. Okay? Self-care and mindfulness, yes, they've been somewhat effective over the years and important to keep doing, but it is not alleviating the burnout in a greater way, because the problem is that self-care and mindfulness are not hitting at the source of what it is that this burnout is all about. It is not hitting it, it is missing it. And again, being that it's multifaceted, self-care, if all the attention is being on self-care, it kind of implies that the self is not doing something right. But really having it in equal amounts, looking at the way the organization and leadership are working, other aspects, not just the self. They're an important component, but it is multifaceted. So how can we think about this going forward? Well, again, talking about deconstructing burnout. People can and do recover from burnout. Burnout recovery. So you look at this, and this is where the idea too of restoration comes in. Restoration is a process to where it's about burnout recovery, but it's really about alleviating and releasing the toxins associated with those prior traumas or injustices done. So you're releasing the toxins, and you refill yourself with compassion and self-love. Social workers, you have done so great, especially those with the prior instances of trauma. You have done so great to get to where you are. And really, it's not as if the perpetrators or that event beat you. You have become a contributing member of society for the good of society, and you've done well educationally. Social workers, you are enough. You don't need to feel great by ending child abuse or ending homelessness. You have already made a contributing you made a contribution to society in many, many great ways. So really knowing that you are good enough. Okay? And restoring is part of that, because then what you might want to do is, let's say for example, you're restoring and you're like, hey, I realized that ending child abuse was a bit high of a goal to achieve, and I'm gonna kind of be a little bit more realistic in the sense that I can't end it on my own. But you know what? It's with that meaning to where it might be a little bit more realistic, to where you're really restoring a healthier state of self, because you know what worked and what didn't work. You have more information about how you burned out last time, to the point to where now, hey, I'm not my original state of self, I'm a healthier state of self because I know more about my own balance of job demands and resources. Okay, so also with restoring too, comes this aspect of, values will come too as you alter your meaning, if it needs to be altered. And compassion and self-love come in, and also too, it's this aspect of, let me think of the best term, is that, if you need in society to break away from people that might be toxic, that do not allow you to restore and be compassionate for yourself, then that's what you need to do. You need to be around yourself with those to where that do promote the social justice. And that's what's so great about the social work profession. We're all about promoting social justice. I can tell you that people feel such a belonging when coming to social work conferences, because really in that good headspace. And that's what you need to restore yourself, is to let go of those toxins and restore yourself, to say, yes, I am good and there is goodness in the air. We cannot be overcome with these things we hear in the media and all over the news that this person's getting away with that and so forth. Don't let that get to you. And if it does, turn it off. Turn it off. Go do something else. Fill yourself with goodness and the chance to put goodness inside your head. Okay? So also too, with self-care comes an aspect of, again, having it in moderation, because burnout is multifaceted. So you want to be able to address the many aspects of it. And restoring is a very good way to do it. And also too, looking at burnout, the term burnout, don't give it so much power and so much weight. So many people can and do recover from burnout. Okay? So I kind of want to give you a little bit more thought here as we finish up. And social workers, you have been in survival mode for so long. It's exhausting. But guess what? They did not beat you. The event did not beat you. You have prevailed. And what we really need to do now in this profession is thrive. Show the world what we can really do. Because again, the prior instances of trauma, the people or the event that caused our trauma, you know what? We've done so good. We've overcome so much. And it's remembering that we're all a group together to support the well-being of all of us. Because again, it's this trauma trigger that is causing us fatigue and emotional overload, which leads to burnout and turnover. Okay, social workers, it's time to thrive. Thank you.